Johnny Jet Rod the Patriot here, bringing you this special report, United Nations troops and martial law in the United States. Okay, now that may seem like a shocking title to you, but let me explain the reason why we're going to talk about this in lieu of the presidential election coming up and several of the policies and executive orders that President Obama has recently signed with the UN, and these executive orders that he signed affecting everyday Americans. Okay, so I've got 7 talking points I'm going to cover in this special report for you. It's crucial information that you need to understand before the election, and some of the reasons so that we'll have a clear understanding why in several states we're seeing a huge increase in United Nations troops conducting military operations, fully armed, looking like they're ready for a fight. Okay, so here's the thing. United Nations have been deployed into the United States for a couple of years, several years now, doing routine training operations. However, lately we've seen a very huge increase in their activity, and they look like they're fully armed, ready for a fight. Now, what we have to understand is that the agreements that President Obama has recently made with the UN include Agenda 2030. This is an agreement that President Obama signed with the UN on September 27th, 2015. Okay, it's the U.S. Global Development Policy, and it's for sustainable development. It's a declaration of open government for implementation of 2030. Now, if you understood what I said, it's a declaration of open government. What that means is that several of the policies and things that happen in America will be under UN control and monitored by the UN in the very near future, with this Agenda 2030 taking place. Okay, there are several things that Agenda 2030 covers. I'm just going to name off a few of them. You can go into the internet and look it up and do your research on this. But what it will do is affect everyday Americans, their children, and it's going to cost America billions of dollars. Let me just explain it real quick. Agenda 2030 covers Global Health Initiative. All right, what that's going to mean is that it's going to be mandatory, possibly mandatory vaccines worldwide. Okay, it also covers food security and nutrition development, essentially in Africa, to help with the very, very widespread hunger crisis that happens over there. What it does is gives $10 billion to the African agriculture industry on top of the Feed the Future initiative that was started by Barack Obama in 2010, which was $1.2 billion of American money. So what this is going to do is cost Americans a lot of money to help end the African food crisis and help them develop a sustainable agriculture. Okay, it also deals with climate change. They're going to develop a smart grid to monitor the agriculture production in Africa. Another very expensive process. Okay, it also deals with ending extreme poverty worldwide. All right, now what that means is that you're going to see more U.S. jobs and more companies leaving America and going overseas to produce products for cheaper labor. It's just going to further the destruction of the American manufacturing probably 10 times worse than the NAFTA agreement. All right. It deals with gender equality and female empowerment. Now, this is a code for degenderizing the public, mainly the Americans. We've seen this with the implementation of the female draft here in America, which in my mind is also a liberal agenda, and it is also a military agenda to be able to produce a standing military that is as large as possible in the case of a large-scale military conflict or civil unrest. We know that Hillary Clinton has raised tensions with Russia by her rhetoric. Barack Obama and his administrations is increasing tensions with China and Russia and North Korea. We're seeing an increase in the level of military activity in and around Iraq and Syria involving U.S. troops. This could be a preparation for the next major worldwide conflict. All right. Agenda 2030 also deals with education systems. Okay. What you're going to see is more Common Core type programs that will be implemented under the influence of the UN, thereby removing the American public interest and involvement in our education system, and it's gonna become governed basically by world governments producing an education system that meets their standard versus the current system that meets the American standard. Okay. It's also going to catalyze private investments. Okay. Now, what I mean by that is that this Agenda 2030 may implement what I consider a global tax, and it may come under the cover of an internet tax. Now, if you understand what I'm saying about that, is that Barack Obama has attempted to give power and control of the internet from ICANN to the UN, meaning that the governing of the American internet will become under the direction and authority of the United Nations. Now, knowing all these several factors that I just laid out for you in Agenda 2030 will be a huge impact on the general public and our monetary system. But it gets worse. Listen to this. Obama has signed a bilateral agreement with several nations involving their UN troops, giving them power and control to enter the U.S. and engage U.S. citizens. It's an attempt to militarize our police, which we all know the liberals want to militarize our police. They want to federalize our police with the signing of this executive order that gives UN troops the authority to engage U.S. citizens in conflict and to maintain peace and order in the event of a civil unrest, or to protect the American citizens in the event of an armed conflict on homeland security, which means that the UN troops will have the power and authority and control to enter our government facilities and provide security and advise our government and our military on operations that will take place in America in the event of a conflict. Now, what we have to understand when I'm talking about this is we have to think about this House Resolution 347 and how that goes in conjunction with this UN troop deployment and martial law here in America. Now, if you don't know anything about House Resolution 347, what that does is it allows the president to give authority to detain United States citizens and detain them without due process indefinitely if they are deemed a threat or a possible threat to national security or enemies of the state. This is a massive overreach by the government in an attempt to say that an ordinary American citizen could be a threat to national security, which in my mind that is a possibility. But what it does is it gives the government the power to indefinitely detain American citizens. Now, let me say something about this. House Resolution 347. Knowing the information I just gave you about that, we also have to understand that there is over 300 FEMA camps in America. All right? Now, these FEMA camps are basically set up for two reasons. Internment camps, and they're also set up in the case of mass civil emergency where we need to shelter Americans on a temporary basis. But the problem is when you see it from the internment camp side, which there's been government documents, U.S. military documents released and gone public, that these military internment type camps, FEMA camps, are already up and running, manned, guarded, powered, ready to operate at a moment's notice, and also staffed by U.S. military and UN troops. If you don't have a clear understanding of what that is or the information about it, you can look up FEMA Camp USA or Internment Camp USA. Look it up, read the information. It's all there for you. This is not a hoax, people. Okay, so what we're talking about when it comes to this House resolution, this Agenda 2030 that's been put together by President Obama's administration, we know that the U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power said the U.S. is proud and humbled and promises to follow the pledges in the agreement with the UN. All right. So let's talk about martial law for a second and what that means with the implementation of this Agenda 2030 and this executive order that also gives the UN troops power and authority and control in a case of an armed conflict, civil emergency, or civil unrest. We need to talk about what martial law really is. Okay, martial law, in the event of a potential threat to the security of the United States, actions are necessary to ensure the availability and adequate resources and production capability, including services and critical technology for national defense requirements. In other words, when martial law is implemented, it is not what many Americans just consider martial law, which is a curfew and you're only allowed to go from point A to point B and checkpoints. No, martial law is a complete and total shutdown of everything in America and taken over by our government, our military, and these UN troops in order to maintain a functional system just for national defense. In other words, all our resources, everything that we have goes directly to the federal government and the military in order to maintain the defense of America. What that means, now think about this, that means the Secretary of Agriculture will have the power and control under FEMA guidance to allocate the resources of food, water, and livestock to first provide for the military, second provide for the citizens, okay? It also means that your energy will be taken over, the energy grid, the transportation system, the water system will all be under the guidance, control, and power of FEMA, the government, and possibly secured and provided security by our military and FEMA and UN troops. It's an incredible detailed report. It's an incredible detailed strategy to gain control and maintain control in the event that it needs to be implemented. Martial law. Okay. Now there's one more talking point that I want to talk about. About this martial law. All right. When we think about that, the provision provided in the martial law, which is added onto the Defense Production Act of 1950. Obama signed an additional provision in the martial law provision, which allows the President of the United States to stay in office until the conditions in the country are deemed safe. Okay? That could possibly halt an election process. It could possibly stop the next president from taking office even after the election if martial law was implemented. It gives the current president, in the event of martial law, the ability to maintain office for an additional 2 years without consent, approval of Congress. Okay? It just gives the power and control to the president to maintain his office. Okay, so we need to talk about this executive order that was signed by President Obama on July 1st, 2016. It's the U.S. policy on pre- and post-strike measures to address civilian casualties in U.S. operations involving the use of force. Now, this is the executive order that actually gives UN troops the power to engage U.S. citizens, arrest U.S. citizens, detain U.S. citizens, protect U.S. citizens, and protect government facilities, secure our infrastructure, and provide security for that in conjunction with the U.S. military and outside the law of the United States, governed by UN. All right, you have to understand how that works. It's a complicated deal. The U.S. policy on civilian casualties resulting from the U.S. operations involving the use of force in armed conflict or in the exercise of the nation's inherent right to self-defense is based on national interests, values, and legal obligations. That is the purpose of this pre- and post-strike measure executive order that was signed July 1st. All right. So the part that really struck me was in the exercise of the nation's inherent right to self-defense. Okay. So there's 2 points to that. What it means is that if we are attacked on our own soil by a foreign entity, this executive order will be implemented. It also means that if normal everyday citizens and patriots create an uprising, thus producing a situation where martial law takes effect, this executive order also takes effect because it is against the national security. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, any attack on our government facilities, our infrastructure, our homeland, or the attack against the citizens of the United States would require this executive order to be implemented. Now, I just want to put a side note in here when it comes to this. President Obama has authorized tens of thousands of migrants from the Middle East to come into this country. Hillary Clinton has stated she wants to increase the migration to this country by 550% above what President Obama has already authorized, and President Obama has already authorized an increase in what he has already previously authorized. So what we're going to see is we're going to see a massive increase in migrants if the liberals gain control. And knowing what has happened over in Europe, particularly Brussels, France, England, Germany, Italy, Sweden, all these countries that have invited millions of migrants. Now, they have a different type of system that allows them to come in. They don't vet these people like we do, but we know our vetting process is broken, and our vetting process is initially conducted by the UN Human Rights Commission. UN Human Rights Commission is the initial screening process for these migrants before it comes to the American Homeland Security and other agencies in America. I did a complete video on the screening or vetting process for these migrants and how they come into America. But they are basically sent to 190 different U.S. cities without the consent or knowledge of your state and local government. It's completely a UN and federal government decision on where these migrants go in America. In other words, let's say you live in any town, USA. You've never seen a Middle Eastern migrant. Friday night, you come home from work. Monday morning comes around, you're getting ready to go to work, and suddenly, there's 500, 1,000 Syrian migrants in your town, and it seems almost like it happened overnight, and you don't know where they came from, and so you ask your local government about it, and they don't have any information to provide for you. Your governor can't provide you with any information. It is a UN and federal government decision to bring these people into this country, and they are sent to 190 different cities. Now, knowing what's happening over there in Europe and the mass uprising, the French are basically at war in Paris with these migrants. The migrants are at war with each other, the Sunnis and Shias. It's a horrible, horrible mess. If those type of things were to happen or begin to happen in America, it would become a civil uprising considered, thus maybe producing a situation where martial law would take effect. This executive order of a pre or post strike would take effect, thereby giving UN troops the power and authority and control to come in and do what they do: provide security, engage American citizens, engage migrants, provide security, conduct military operations, conduct offensive operations against the enemy. This is a dangerous, dangerous time we live in. These UN troops are not here for routine training. They are here in preparation for the future conflict or the future emergency or the future uprising that will take place, and that will require them under these agreements that Obama has signed to take action in America. All right, this is not training. What this is giving the UN the ability to bring their troops in to familiarize themselves with the geography of the United States, the culture of the United States, the American government system, the location of military bases and locations of UN bases, training facilities, and familiarize them with the strategies and tactics that will be implemented in the case of these UN troops being deployed. Okay? So, having said all that, I hope I cleared up the situation and gave you some basic knowledge on one of the reasons or some of the reasons why we are seeing so many UN troops and the increased activity of UN troops in America, fully armed, fully deployable, ready for action. Now, that's my report, and you just have to remember that all this is happening in lieu of an election that is a very volatile election that is going to change the course of the country either way. Doesn't matter who gets elected, the country will take a dramatic turn in either direction, no matter who gets elected. So, I just want you to keep that in mind. Do some of your own research on the subject. I hope I helped you out in that area and gave you some understanding of why we're seeing so many UN troops in America. My name is Johnny Jetrod the Patriot. Thank you, America.